All right, but I want to close this thing so I could better focus. Thank you. All right. So there are a couple of components to celebration of every Yomtov. In order to celebrate a Yomtov, you need to celebrate the Yomtov in the appropriate time. In order for that time to be a time, Hashem entrusted the Jewish court to establish when that time is. So the Jewish court has to establish when the first day of the month is, and based on when the first day of the month is, that's when the holiday following the first day of the month, that's when the holiday is celebrated. But there are some holidays where there are other factors involved. And this holiday that we're about a few weeks to, the holiday of Shavuos, is unique. That this holiday is not associated only with the amount of days in the month. Rather, this holiday is associated with the amount of days since the second day of Passover. Because the holiday of Shavuos is not really a holiday only about the giving of the Torah. The Torah says you should count for 7 weeks, and the 50th day is a holiday of Shavuos. The 50th day is the Yomtov. So let's say you were to travel and cross over the international date line. So for you, you wouldn't have the same amount of days as everybody else. And since the Torah says, Usfartim lachem, you should count for yourself, that means that your holiday begins when your 50 days are up. So if your 50 days are a day earlier, because you crossed the date line that made you lose a day, so then your holiday is going to start a day later. And if you're going to gain a day, your holiday is going to start a day earlier. So this year it's actually very complicated because we're used to having 2-day Yomtovs, and once in a while we'll get a 3-day Yomtov. This year Shavuos is on Sunday night, so if you're celebrating a Shavuos a day early, you're having a 4-day Yomtov. You're having Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, straight Yomtov. I remember one of my relatives this happened to. They had to celebrate because they live in Australia and they traveled to. They were trying to find a rabbi to make to celebrate 4 days of Yomtov. It wasn't exactly what they were expecting. So this is something actually novel that the Rebbe introduced that wasn't known before. At least it wasn't widespread before. But I think it's the Rebbe's own novel halachic insight. But the Rebbe did say that it's better not to travel. In general, people should try not to travel over the date line during this time, so not to enter into this whole argument and discussion. But tonight I want to focus on another component, which is not just relevant to the holiday of Shavuos, it's relevant to every holiday. As I mentioned, the holidays are established based upon when Rosh Chodesh is. But not everyone knew when Rosh Chodesh was. Some people lived close to the Jewish courts. They lived close to Israel. And they would know when the Jewish court established they have Rosh Chodesh. But if you lived far away from Israel, you would not know when Rosh Chodesh is. So what would you do? When it comes the holiday of Passover, you would celebrate 2 days, just in case, because Rosh Chodesh could either be the 29th or the 30th day of the month before Passover, the month of Adar. So if you don't know what the Jewish court established, if the Jewish court established that the first day of the new month is on the 30th of Adar, or if the Adar has 30 days and the first day of Nisan is a 31st day from the 1st of Adar, you don't know. So when you celebrate Passover, you got to celebrate both. Celebrate both day 1, day 15 of Nisan and day 16 of Nisan, just in case. And because of that custom that people did, today all Jews in the diaspora celebrate 2 days of Yomtov. Now the question though is, we'll discuss tonight, the main focus tonight is like this. What do you do if you travel from Israel to outside of Israel? Or you travel from outside of Israel to Israel? Do you look at yourself as based upon the place you are in right now? Or do you look at yourself based upon where your I thought you'd get to see you in person, Yehuda. What happened? I saw you in person. You didn't hear me announce we're going to have a class in the shul? All right. No problem. I won't take it personally this time. Okay. You want to see me by Zoom? That's fine. You got points. Anyways, so the question is, how do you look at yourself? Do you look at yourself as where you come from, where your home is, or is your halacha connected to where you are right now? So the Gemara brings a story in Psachim Daf Nun Aleph and Beis. Gemara brings a story how Rav Safra once traveled to Israel. I'm sorry, he once traveled to Babylonia. He is from Israel. He traveled to Babylonia. And in Israel, they celebrate one day of Yomtov. And in Babylonia, they celebrate 2 days of Yomtov. So Gemara says, Rav Safra told Rav Abba that we still, although I know what day Rosh Chodesh is, I know, and not only I know, but this is the way that our forefathers and always in Israel only celebrated 1 day of Yomtov because they know when Rosh Chodesh is. So because of that, although I'm going to Babel right now, going to Babylonia, I know that in Babylonia they celebrate 2 days of Yomtov. Although I know, I have to do what everyone else does. Okay, I don't want to make an argument. I don't want to make it look like there's 2 different Torahs, there's two different religions, and therefore I'm not going to work on Yomtov on the 2nd day of Yomtov. Although for me it's not Yomtov anymore, but it's called. Gemara phrases it this way: things which are permissible, but other people consider them to be forbidden, you're not allowed to permit them in front of them. So since Rav Safra said, I know for me it's really not Yomtov because I am from Israel. However, since I'm now in Babylonia and they're considering the 2nd day of Yomtov, if I were to go and to drive my car now in Babylonia, so Beryl's wondering how could he drive his car in Babylonia? What is he, Fred Flintstone or the Jetsons? The Beryl didn't have cars, whatever. We'll get to that later. Either way, if I were to drive my car in Babylonia, that would be a desecration of Yomtov because of the custom of the place. So it's not that I'm legally, halachically bound biblically to keep 2 days of Yomtov. I'm only keeping a 2nd day of Yomtov because of the argument. In private, you can't do what you want, although your logic is correct. It would seem that way. But the author mentions that even in Bitsina, even privately, you should not do work, as we'll get to later, because it's impossible. Author says to do work in a way that would totally not be known. So therefore, even Bitsina, even privately, you shouldn't do work. Right. The Baal HaMoer, he says like this: Behind the Nachsim and Marava, Osher Luhul Meved Avita B'Yem Tev Sheni B'Yishuv. I feel Daitel Achser. V'im Higia LaYishuv Ein Daitel Achser Hukah B'Nei Vasa Kamesam Zeh Tzasam and Hadis. He says like this: those people who are not intending to stay where they moved to, they're intending to return. The only prohibition they have is because of an argument. But those who travel and they have no intent in returning, they've moved, they have now a new classification. They used to be considered a member of the state of the land of Israel, and now they have a new classification. They are now considered Babylonians, and therefore they are biblically obligated to keep a 2nd day of Yomtov. Or not really biblically, because the whole concept of 2nd day of Yomtov is just because of the custom of the place. But they're legally, I don't know the right word to use in English, but it's not just a question of custom. It's considered more of a halachic obligation because that's where you live. You're a Babylonian. Babylonians have to keep 2 days of Yomtov. One second, better ask a question first.
What if you are native affairs as well in Babylonia during wars and like that, and the 2nd day you have to put on.
So yes, so the Alter Rebbe says this is where the private thing comes in. If you are going to go back to Israel, you should put on tefillin privately, and you should have a Shemana Esrei quietly, your own Shemana Esrei, but you still can't do any work. Now, this is that's what the Balamoyer says, and that's all the Alter Rebbe Paskins. Alter Rebbe Paskins in Siman Tov Salikov Sev Zayin, Ne'eretz Yisrael, Shmuel Chutz La'aretz, people who are from Israel, who traveled outside of Israel. Even if they have in mind to go back to Israel, they're not allowed to work. Why? Because we place upon them the stringencies of the place that they've arrived in. It's not because they're considered like Babylonians or considered like Americans, but we place upon them the stringency of the place that they're in. There shouldn't be an argument. However, says the Alter Rebbe, what if they have no intent in returning? Then the halachic status that they have is like the place that they're in right now. And that's what the Alter Rebbe says, and that's what most poskim say. It has to do with what your intent is. But the Alter Rebbe has another opinion that he mentions in the same Simmons in Sifyat Aleph. He says it's a second opinion. Second opinion says, even if you have in mind to return to your original place, you have in mind to move, you're from Babylonia, you're now in Israel, and you have in mind to go back, you're not moving, you're still considered like an Israeli. You have no obligation whatsoever to keep the second day of Yomtov. And vice versa. If you're an Israeli and you went to Babylonia, you're obligated to keep the second day of Yomtov. It's not just a question of keep both, put on tefillin and don't work. It's just, no, you don't. If you are from Israel and you come to outside of Israel right now, don't put on tefillin. You keep a full Yomtov. There's no obligation whatsoever to have anything to do with Israel. You are now where you are. That's the second opinion, and the Alter Rebbe says it more clearly in the Madura Basra. The Alter Rebbe wrote a second edition of Shulchan Aruch, and in this very first siman of Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe says very clearly, Bnei Eretz Yisrael, people from Israel who come to outside of Israel, have to keep the holiness of the second day of Yontif, although they have in mind to go back. Although they intend to go back, the Alter Rebbe says that they are obligated. Right now, they're outside of Israel. They have to keep 2 days of Yontif. That's what Alter Rebbe says in his second edition. And the general rule is whenever the Alter Rebbe has two stances, two positions, you always go by the latter one. That's when he reviewed the halacha and he gave a final ruling. In the language of the Gemara, halacha kebasra, you always go by the last opinion. Since the Alter Rebbe has a Madura Basra, so it would seem logical that we should rule like the Madura Basra. We should rule that it doesn't matter where you're from. It matters where you are. You're from Israel, and today you came, you're going back right after Shavuos. Doesn't matter. You have to keep 2 days of Yontif. Parenthetically, Shavuos is a bit of an anomaly, because Shavuos was something that everybody always knew when the holiday was. Because even if you live far from Israel, and even if you didn't have the internet and emails and WhatsApp and texts, after a month after Passover, you're going to find out when Rosh Chodesh was. And therefore, Shavuos should really be 1 day, because you can't say no one, people don't know about it. Everyone knows when Shavuos is. The reason we keep Shavuos 2 days is not outside of Israel, is in order not to differentiate between one holiday and the other. But technically, this isn't the holiday that we don't know. And in fact, the Rebbe actually once said that there's more than once. He spoke about the special value of the second day of Shavuos. All other holidays, the second day of the Yontif, is there just as a sort of a doubt. It's like do you have to do it? You don't have to do it. We do it because our ancestors did it because they didn't know. The holiday of Shavuos has a rabbinic certainty. You have to keep 2 days, although you know, because the sages don't want us to differentiate between one holiday and the other. Anyway, so it would seem that the halacha should follow what the Alter Rebbe writes in the Madura Basra, that we should go always by where you are. But there are letters of our Rebbeim which seem to side with the first opinion. Although I said that we always go by the last opinion, but what's the last opinion? The last opinion is the Rebbeim who succeeded the Alter Rebbe, who saw the Alter Rebbe wrote and ruled differently. And so there are letters of the Rebbeim which seem to side with the first opinion. So the Rebbe has there are different rabbanim within Chabad who have different understandings of what the Rebbe's position is on this. There are those who have there are different answers the Rebbe gave, so it's not clear what the Rebbe's opinion is. But in general, what you always do is you have to ask a Rav, you have to ask a rabbi. In other words, there are some things which are clearly in Shulchan Aruch, and there are questions which are not clear in Shulchan Aruch, and then you have to ask a Rav. So there's a certain power of a psak din of a Rav. So even though you could argue that there's a Medura Basra, but the bottom line is you ask a Rav. If I remember correctly, I don't want to misquote, but I remember correctly, the Rebbe once said, the person phrased a question to the Rebbe this way. He says, rabbis in Israel rule this way. Rabbis outside of Israel rule this way about your opinion about what we should do. What should we? So the Rebbe said, ask the rabbis in the place you're in. So because that's where you are now. So it seems like that just like the Gemara says that ba'aseh Rav karav, from the place that when you're in Rav's place, you pass like Rav. But so bottom line is that if you're in this situation, you should seek the guidance of your rabbi. That's the make shalom, right? Okay, so practically, the only discrepancy between these two opinions will be in a situation where, let's say, you left Israel and you came to Los Angeles for Passover, or if you left Los Angeles, went to Israel for Passover. But let's say you went for a year. It wasn't just for a Passover, went for a whole year. So what would be the situation then? What would the halacha be if you went for a whole year? There are a lot of yeshiva boys who come to learn in a yeshiva in Israel for a year, outside of Israel for a year. It's a whole year. Does that make a difference? So people consider a year to be a sufficient amount of time. In other words, even if we don't consider the Alter Rebbe's words in the Medura Basra, let's say the words in the Medura Basra are not the halacha. The halacha follows the first opinion. Still, if you travel for a whole year, many people say a whole year, that's sufficient. A whole year, you should certainly say that's considered like you're not going back. Although you're going back after a year, but it's a whole year. It's a part of your life. You establish a residence, and therefore you should be considered like the place you are for that year. That's what people in general say.
And what if you're not going to stay in there? You're thinking you're just going for the Passover.
Then there's the argument there. And the argument is if you only go for Passover, but if you're going for a whole year, it seems that everybody would agree that you should consider the place you are in now as a permanent residence. That's what people say. But the Alter Rebbe,
you decided to go for 1 year like this, and now you're going to go on. And you don't know when you're going to go back. Maybe you'll stay 6 months, not a whole year.
We're going to get to there. So the Alter Rebbe does not make this distinction between 1 year or 2 years. And the question is, where does this come from? Even more, the Alter Rebbe, what happened over here? Oh, sorry about that, guys.
And this was the situation with my 2 sons.
Yeah.
They came from America to go there and inside the United States. And the question was, they asked the Rebbe.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what they were going to do at first, right?
Right.
So it was a confusing situation
right.
for some time. And if you establish residence, then you may be drafted into the army. So that's another incident. So they weren't sure.
What did the rabbi tell them?
I don't remember
exactly. Okay.
But in the end, they established residency and have kids and got married and so on.
I know our custom is with the mezuzah, that a mezuzah is placed on the right side going into a house.
Right.
That's if the door opens up once the door opens up this way, right? The door opens this way. This isn't considered the way you enter. What?
It's still going to put it on the right side, unless it's on the outside.
One second. Let's say it's not difficult. Let's say the way you determine which is the right side is by the hinges, which the hinges establish where the door turns. That's a Chabad custom. You always go by the hinges, except for the front door. The front door is always you put it the right side going into the house. Otherwise, you establish what's the right or left, based or which side is the right side, based upon which way the door opens. Door opens, you enter the door, and then you put in the right side going in. If there's no door, then you go by which room is more important. If you can't establish which room is more important, then you go by. Oh, Eldad, come join us for a couple minutes till we finish. If you can't establish which, don't worry, go on vacation. Don't worry. No clear that it. No religious coercion here. So if you can't establish which room is more important, let's say it's a living room and a dining room, and you can't establish in your family which room is more important to your family, so then you go by which direction you travel more. Do you travel more from the living room to the dining room? Then you put the right side going to the dining room. Right. So I know this rabbi, famous rabbi. His name is Rabbi Klein, Moshe Klein. So he had in his basement, he had a store, and the door of the basement opened up to inside. It opened up to the street. So it would ordinarily, if it wasn't the front door, it should be on the left side. So he asked Rabbi Zalman, what side should the door be on? He says it should be on the left side going out. But then he made that basement to be his store, which means it became instead of it being the back door of his basement, it became the front door of his store. So now you should have to switch a mezuzah because the status has changed. Yeah, you turn it around. You put mezuzah on the other side. So, oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know about that. That's an interesting question. Okay. There are scenarios like that as well, but let's try to get back to over here. This concept of establishing your residence in two different places and when it's considered a change of residence, the Alter discusses in another place the laws of Passover. Halacha is that the day before Passover, it's forbidden to work from midday and on. Why is it forbidden to work? Because the custom always was that whenever you bring a sacrifice to Hashem, that day is like a holiday for you. Since every Jew brings the Paschal lamb to Hashem, therefore the day before Passover is considered like a personal holiday. The question is, don't worry, it's okay, he's doing good. It's osmosis. Let him accomplish two things: osmosis and resting up. Come on. Okay. So there is a custom to not work on a day that you bring a holiday, to bring a sacrifice, and therefore from midday and on, you're not allowed to work. What about before midday? Before midday, the Alter says it depends upon the custom of where you are. Some people have a custom not to work before midday. Some people have a custom to work before midday. So Alter says it depends upon your custom. And if you go to a certain place and you have no intent to go back to your home forever, you have intent to stay where you are, then you are considered you're considered like a member of those people that you're in, like the people that you are right now. However, if you are not intending to stay there forever, you plan to go back to your city after Zman Meruba, after 5 years, I'll go back. Nevertheless, the Alter says, since you're not planning to stay there, you do not have to keep the halachas of the place that you're in. They have the custom, let's say, to not work over there, so you don't have that status because you are not planning to live there forever. So the Alter doesn't differentiate between 1 year or 2 years. He says, where are you planning to live forever? That's what Alter says over there. So according to these words of the Alter Rebbe, there's no difference, a year or 2 years. So where does this come from? Oops, here we go again. Where does this come from? This concept of, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, don't worry. No one has to travel across this stretch. Don't worry. Where does this concept come from? The concept of making differentiation between 1 year and 2 years. So the source of this actually is from the Radvaz. There's an argument in the Radvaz and the Pri Chodesh. The Radvaz says that Radvaz says like this. We make a differentiation between someone who has intent to go back right away home, to someone who has intended to return later on. Like, for example, he says, let's say someone wants to sell merchandise. He wants to buy merchandise. Or he wants to go to some special, there's a yard site. He wants to travel to celebrate the yard site. That's considered someone who wants to go back right away. But let's say, as you were saying before, you are planning to open up a new business. Not trying to buy merchandise, not trying to sell merchandise. You say, I want to go to the Golden Medina. You know what Golden Medina is? America was called the Golden Country. People thought, this must be the place of our dreams, right? I want to go to the Golden Country. I want to be able to establish myself there and make a business there. If that is what you're intending, which means there's no clear definition of when you're going back home. So then, although you did not permanently uproot your residence, that is called having intent to return later, not considered returning immediately, and therefore the halachic status changes. Then he gives another example. Let's say you go there with your wife, you go there with your family. So in either of these scenarios, whether if you go for you have an indefinite amount of time, you're going to try out business, or you're going there with your family, even though you have intent to go back to Israel, since you're there with your family, you may end up staying. Therefore, we consider it as if you do not have any intent to return, and you're considered a resident of where you are. That's what Radva says. The Pri Chadash disagrees. Pri Chadash says, what Radva says, I don't find any other poskim saying what he says, and therefore don't rely on what the Radva says. But he says, if somebody goes with his family and he goes there to do business, if there are both conditions there, he goes there with his wife and children, and he's going there for an indefinite amount of time, so then it's possible that he actually is going to move. And in that scenario, that's when he would consider someone to have a status of the place that he's in now. So that's the opinion of the Pri Chadash. The Alter Rebbe rules like the Pri Chadash in regards to the first opinion. Remember, there's Dura Basar, but in regards to the first opinion that we look at what your intent. So Alter Rebbe says that we only consider you a resident of the place you went to if there's no clear decision to ever come back. But if you plan to come back after a year, then the Alter Rebbe would agree that, according to the first opinion, that you're not considered a resident of the place you're in. If you don't have any intent specifically to come back, you want to just try out your luck in America, so then the Radva says that's enough. But the Pri Chadash says it has to be both conditions. You have to move to do business, and you're there with your family. Both those conditions, if both conditions are present, only then does Alter Rebbe agree that you consider like a resident place you're in. Yeah.
You move your family to Israel.
Yeah.
But your business is in America.
Okay.
And you have to earn a living in America. But on certain holidays, you got to come back to be with the family, like in travel and sales.
So there is room to say that the halachas in Shulchan Aruch may not apply as well to our current conditions today, because you may go with your wife somewhere and your house is in Israel, but you're here with your wife, you're trying out business, but you have a house in Israel, right? So it's not so clear. But what we do see from this is that there, according to the Alter Rebbe, there's no distinction between 1 year and 2 years.
But are you what I'm asking? Are you making 2 days Pesach, and your family is making 1 day Pesach in Israel?
So,
and when you come to Israel, let's say you're going to stay.
One second. If your family is in Israel and you just came here to do business, so then Alter Rebbe said you go like the Pri Chadash, and you have to keep according to the place you came from. But if you're here with your wife and doing business, but you have a house in Israel, then Alter Rebbe says then you would he would agree that you go by the place you're in now. The question though is, nowadays, does this also apply? Because people may be traveling with their family and trying out business, but they have a lot invested in the place they came from. So is that considered? Shulchan Aruch uses the expression "oiker dirasi," uprooting your home. Not really uprooting your home. So So
If you're, the family is there in Israel and you're staying during the holidays in America, you're not always going back to the family.
yeah, so you're considered like a resident of Israel, according to everybody. According to everybody, yeah, because right. So okay, the Rebbe Rashab sent some chassidim to Israel to make a yeshiva, and the leader of the yeshiva sent a letter to Rebbe Rashab asking the Rebbe Rashab what he should do. It was very strange for him to eat chametz on the last day of Pesach. So he asked, "What should I do? I don't want to do that." The Rebbe Rashab responded to him, "There is no chachmas over here. There's no how you feel. You don't feel. There's Jewish law, halacha. So it doesn't matter how you feel." For regarding these Shiva students who were there for over a year, so they have a halachic status as just visiting, and they're considered the residents of the city of Lubavitch where they came from. But you who are there with your wife, said the Rebbe Rashab, you have a halachic status and you're there to run this yeshiva. You have a halachic status as of where you are, even though you have intent to return. But you're there to run the yeshiva. It was not a permanent mission. I think it ended up being permanent for him. He ended up not coming back. But there wasn't the intent. The intent was he's eventually going to go back to the city of Lubavitch. But still, since he went there with his wife, and it's an indefinite amount of time, so therefore he had to keep halacha like a resident of Israel. So it comes out that there's no real distinction between 1 day or 2 years. But again, it depends who you ask, because the Rebbe's opinion about this isn't clear, and therefore it depends which Rav you ask about what the do we pass like the first opinion of the Rebbe or the second. But there's only an argument between these two opinions in a situation where a person is just traveling for a Yomtov, but not if he's traveling with his wife and he's planning to stay there and then not sure how long he's going to stay. And there is actually a letter of the Rebbe. There were later answers different to this, but just want to share with you this letter of the Rebbe. This person asked the Rebbe, he traveled with his family to New York, and he asked the Rebbe what to do. He's from Israel. So the Rebbe said to him, our minhag is to act like the place that you have arrived in, even though you have intent one day to return, and especially because you're here with your family, therefore you are considered like a member of a resident of outside of Israel. So the Rebbe doesn't make a distinction between how long he's staying. The guy doesn't know what he's doing. He came, he's trying his luck, he's not sure how long he's going to be. That's enough. The moment you know, you know. But right now he doesn't know. And therefore he is considered like a member of where he is now, a resident of where he is now. It's possible that what people are saying that you should differentiate between one year and another could be that although the Alter rules like the Radvaz, but if you have another, it's called in halacha snif, another halacha concern, that there's another opinion which says that a year does matter. The Radvaz makes a distinction about a year. So so could be that's if you add both things together, perhaps that's why people make this distinction. But according to all opinions, if you're not sure if you're going back, and you're not sure if you're going back, you're here in a new place, not sure if you're going back, you're there with your family, certainly you have to consider yourself a resident of where you are right now. You're not sure, you consider yourself where you are right now. Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
You often think now of these halachas, what's the best way of making it more enjoyable to get to 7 days of making Pesach? So what should one do? Get a resident in Israel and then do what you want to do in America. So you have both worlds, if that's the better way of doing it.
The Alter Rebbe once said that people in Eretz Yisrael are like a smart student. A smart student can accomplish in one day what it takes another student to accomplish in 2 days. But the Rebbe commented on this and he said, that's only regarding absorbing the holiday quicker or deeper or whatever. But regarding the teacher who's teaching, it's a better teacher who could teach a more or less gifted student. And therefore, the light of Hashem in the diaspora is a higher kind of light. Yes, out in Israel, they're able to absorb it more deeply, whatever, and therefore it takes them only 1 day. In 1 day, they're able to take the whole Yomtov. But there's an advantage outside of Israel, and that, because in order to reach outside of Israel, there has to be a stronger light of Hashem to reach us outside of Israel. So there's advantage in both.
But in fact, you want to be in America, and basically your residence is in Israel.
Okay, we'll stop here.
Very good. Thank you.